started now. Is that good? I'm Harry Carver. I am chair of the coordinators of Together Frankfort. Together Frankfort was organized hasn't been that many years ago, about 8 years ago, by a group of volunteers that were concerned about, is that better? Are you here now? They're concerned about the state of our elections. They got together and decided that there would be two main goals for the group: to register folks to vote and make sure that they provide accurate and timely information to help educate voters. To this end, Together Frankfort has organized a number of activities over the past years to inform and engage the citizens of Frankfort and Franklin County. We've had candidate forums, public discussions, and then partnering with other organizations to do things, demonstrations, letter writing campaigns, and our wildly successful Earth Day event with the Liberty Hall folks. And I should mention too, and Mary Lynn's not here, that above all, voter registration events happen throughout the community at every opportunity. So we have a year where there's no election, so hopefully we can catch up and register a lot more people to vote. If you have not, okay, because nobody writes anything clearly, and especially emails. So if you are not getting an email from us, it's because somebody couldn't read your handwriting. So I'm going to pass these things around and make sure if you haven't signed in, or just go ahead and sign in, and we'll make sure that we've got the right email for you. Also, we do invite you to join us. Margaret and Linda are at the table. If you would like to join, you can look, sign up with them, go to our website, and also we'd be happy to take contributions, because all this stuff, unfortunately, doesn't happen for free. Tonight, we are resuming our series of Civics 101 forums. We started, I guess, last winter. Decided that it was important to bring folks together and have speakers that would, engage and inform on, issues that were important to our community. We started out with some very local things that we were talking about last year when certain legislators wanted to privatize the plant board, and then we were able to have our local county and city folks explain how their financing systems work and how local governments work. And we've gone to national issues. We previewed Project 2025, who knew? And now we're going to move on to possibly global topics. We've been talking about this for a while, and it just seemed now was the time that we would have Jeff talk about socialism. Jeff Laird is one of our coordinators, and I should, while I'm standing here, all the rest of the coordinators, if you all would raise your hand so everybody can know who's who. Jeff grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and went to a competing high school from where I went, and has lived in Frankfort for the past 30-some years. He's a retired cartographer, that's a hard word to say, and a GI support specialist, and traveled around the world working on projects before he settled down and retired. He has bachelor's degrees in geography at George Mason and philosophy at the University of New Orleans. He is also a member of the Democratic Socialist Party of America. So without further ado, I'm going to let him explain the ins and outs of socialism.
I don't usually do this, so if I pass out, somebody come get me. Right? My name is Jeffrey Laird. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And I am a socialist. I am specifically a social capitalist. And tonight's one of the things we're going to do is explore the difference and talk about a lot of things we hear in political discussion now that some people are still uncomfortable with. I am decidedly not a communist. And as a member of the DSA, I am not recruiting tonight. But the goal is for everyone to leave here tonight with a clear understanding of the difference between the Marxist socialist ideal of communism and modern socialism, modern democratic socialism, as we see in many of the Euro-socialisms and even in Canada. So with that, if I say a term or phrase that you're not familiar with, feel free to stop me. I'll try to define it the best I can. As far as questions go, hopefully I'll get through this in time. There'll be plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. So with that, Okay, to start, some terms that are often used interchangeably, which may not be actually interchangeable based on their context. Progressivism is often confused with liberalism. Okay. Comments from the crowd are welcome. Okay, so the word liberal is widely misinterpreted and often misused to the extent where we're actually going to come back to this word towards the end and look at how it's actually constructed, what its origin is. Progressivism focuses on the collective. They embrace change, and they believe that social reform and government programs and policies are able to lift the status of the collective welfare. Conservatism is often confused with republicanism, and that's mainly because in this country we have a conservative party that happens to call itself Republicans. But republicanism is actually a political construct wherein the right to govern is derived from the people. So you could be a progressive and a conservative living in a republic, which you all are. Conservatives, they tend to prefer social continuity, traditional values, small government, low taxes, and they are often resistant to change, where progressives usually embrace change. That brings us to socialism, often confused with communism. So here we go. Yes, sir.
Can you go back to conservatism for a minute?
Okay.
There's fiscal conservatism and there's,
Political.
yeah, and
This is political.
this is all politics.
Pretty much.
What are you talking about?
Yes, sir. Okay, socialism describes a number of economic systems ranging from orthodox Marxist socialism to social capitalism and many variations in between. Socialism and communism are the same thing, and socialism always leads to communism. These two claims I got so tired of hearing is why I put this presentation together. The fact is, socialism is not communism. Socialism is an economic system. Communism is a political system. But communism academically can be discussed in terms of an economic system, in which case communism is a redistribution of collective resources based on need, wherein socialism is a redistribution of collective resources based on input. So input, what's that? Well, as I look out over the audience tonight, I might bet a nickel that one or two of you are taking Social Security. I am too. But your check's not the same as mine. Could be more, could be less. And the reason is because the amount of time that I worked, the amount of taxes I paid into the system, and the amount of salary that I received designates how much I get out. In a modern socialism, you get out of the system what you put into the system. So what is the truth value of the following statements? You cannot have communism without socialism. That's true. But you can have socialism without communism. That's also true. The truth of these statements depends on the context. We need to understand if we're talking about orthodox Marxist socialism in the communist model, or if we're talking about modern democratic socialism, the way we see in many of the European democratic socialisms today. But the confusion is understandable. I had a lot of fun with this slide. There are 53 political parties in the United States, of which 18 are ballot eligible. So if I was to look at a list, and this is a partial list, looking for the Social Democrats or democratic socialism, I could be misled. If I go up to the top there, Party for Socialism and Liberation, they're communist. Freedom Socialist Party is Trotskyite. Trotskyism is a purist form of Marxism. Communism, exactly the way Marx wrote it, no variations, no concessions. Under that, we have social democracy. It's associated with the Justice Party. Well, the Justice Party was created in 2011 by Rocky Anderson, who is an ex-mayor of Salt Lake City. All parties have platforms. Platforms have planks, and his main plank is the removal of corporate dominance and wealth, concentrated wealth, from the political process. And we all wish him good luck with that. The National Socialist Movement, these guys are Nazis. The Peace and Freedom Party, Democratic Socialism, they say, this party was created in the 1960s by disaffected members of the SDS and the Black Panther Party. They ran Eldridge Cleaver for president in 1968. You don't hear much of them now. They consider themselves to be an anti-Zionist movement and have pretty much faded from the scene. The next four, Socialist Action, Alternative, Equality, all Trotskyite. Socialist Labor Party of America is DeLeonist. Daniel DeLeon, in the early part of the 20th century, came up with a system to where unions form the political realm. So all the different departments of government would actually be run by unions. It was popular for a little bit, but after FDR passed the social welfare programs in the 1930s, it fizzled out. At the end is Socialist Workers' Party, also communist, and the one I have outlined there is the DSA. That's the one you're looking for if you're looking for social democracy party in the United States. It is the modern version of the original Socialist Party of America, begun by Eugene Debs back in the 30s. So just because you have socialist in your name doesn't really tell you anything. So this is a good time to dispense with the Nazi argument before we get on further. I actually heard this argument made by the Fox News in the Morning genius Brian Kilmeade on national news, on the air. Premise one, the Nazi Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Premise two, the word socialist appears in the name. Conclusion, therefore socialists are Nazis. Any of you that are lawyers or philosophers trained in critical thinking will note that there are some logical issues with this argument. Specifically, it runs afoul of the informal fallacy of ambiguous middle term, the ambiguous middle term being socialist. Using the same logic that Brian uses, I can make the argument, nothing is better than eternal happiness. A ham sandwich is better than nothing. Therefore, a ham sandwich is better than eternal happiness. It's exactly the same logic, all right? When we're presented with an argument like this, whether it's on TV or in the news or something, you cannot take it at face value. You have to do some work. The truth is, this party was originally founded by Anton Drexler in Munich, and he was concerned that it might become irrelevant among many other parties in the political and economic chaos that was Germany after World War I. So he added socialist to it, hoping to attract some labor and socialist interests. Adolf Hitler co-opted the party. It became fascist, which is neither a socialist nor a workers' party. And after the Enabling Act was passed, registered social democrats and communists were arrested and sent to concentration camps, primarily Dachau. Socialists are not Nazis, and Nazis are not necessarily socialists. Nazis are definitely fascists. Okay, capitalism, socialism, how did it all start? With the Industrial Revolution. Feudalism, the political structure that we endured for probably 1,200 years, gives way to mercantilism and state-held monopolies. Mercantilism evolves to capitalism and free markets. Socialism is a response to capitalist inequalities, like wage labor and the class system. These pictures are indicative of the London that Karl Marx was writing in the mid-19th century. He was a German outcast. And he was actually expelled, lived in France a while, then moved to London, where he lived the rest of his life, he died in 1889, in abject poverty, to the point where 3 of his children died of disease because he could not afford medicine to save them. He often appealed to his friend Frederick Engels for money to make the rent if he couldn't sell articles to paper. So he was poor, and if you've read Charles Dickens, if you've read Hard Times or A Christmas Carol, the abject poverty, exploitation, and misery that those books depict were his reality when he was writing his theory of communism. So that's important to take that into consideration. And what he saw as being wrong with capitalism on a moral standing. This is a picture of London. The pollution is coal smoke. Coal is used to burn, to heat water, to drive the steam engines, which are the means of production in the factories and the mills. This is a textile mill. The pulley system and conveyor lines are driven by these steam engines. Adam Smith, philosopher and economist, and also the chair of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, publishes The Wealth of Nations in 1776. This is the Bible of capitalism. Okay. Smith's ideas are a reflection of economics in light of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and he states that free market economies are the most productive and beneficial to their societies. He goes on to argue for an economic system based on individual self-interest. Remember this, as we call this incentive, led by an invisible hand that would achieve the greatest good for all. The invisible hand is not the hand of God. The invisible hand is the hand of a market. Supply and demand dictates the market and the price of commodities. Capitalism is the emphasis is on the individual, competition over cooperation. Forms, laissez-faire, unregulated free market. Laissez-faire is a French term. It actually means allow us to do. It is freely translated as just let us do whatever we feel like. Various degrees of government regulation can also appear. The goal is to create and amass wealth. The reality is that it's a very successful economic system for generating wealth. There's none better. No other economic system approaches it if the goal is to generate wealth. Market driven by supply and demand promotes incentive to excellence through reward for individual effort, promotes innovation through competition, and rewards the most efficient producers with the highest profit. The issues are that it comes with its own set of problems. Income inequality, what we hear today as income disparity, promotes a class system based on economic status with no guarantee of a middle class. You read this from cover to cover, I won't make you believe that I have. You'll never find the term middle class anywhere in it. It just doesn't exist. There's the owners of the means of production and labor. That's it. Few do really well. I mean really well. And some more do okay. The vast majority struggle from paycheck to paycheck, and poverty is a necessary reality. In a competitive system, there are winners, and therefore there must be losers. The evolution of capitalism in Adam Smith's time, which is the mid to late 18th century, is referred to as industrial, characterized by the rise of industrialists and shifts from merchants towards factory production. After World War II, social democracy reigned, and it moved to managerial capitalism, where managers emerged as a new class, forming compromises with workers represented by strong unions. Now, a lot of times when we see a graphic depicting the working class or labor, we see the clenched fist. This is often misinterpreted as a symbol of anger. It's not. Its origin was a spread palm, but the individual digits on their own are weak. Combine them together and they find strength in unity. And that's what that symbol means. So we should never fear symbols, and we should certainly never fear words, but it behooves us to know what they mean. In the 80s to present day, under economic neoliberalism, which we'll discuss further, it further evolved into its current form, which is corporate capitalism, where corporations control production and profits to increase shareholder value. Providing a service to benefit mankind has been replaced by increasing shareholder value. That is where the focus is in today's capitalism in this country. Socialism, Karl Marx, philosopher and economist, says that one of his best-known quotes is, "Capitalism contains the seeds of its own demise." We'll see exactly how that happens. He publishes Das Kapital, that's this one, volume 1 of 3. And I'm not showing you these books to try to impress on you what, fantastic reads these are. It's important in economics to read these. What I'm trying to impress on you is that both of these men were profound thinkers. They knew what they were doing. They were both well educated, and they spent a lot of time researching their various theories. This is a rejection of capitalism as antisocial. There's the first appearance we see of the word social in Socialism. A critical analysis of political economy meant to reveal the contradictions of the capitalist mode of production, including the alienation and the exploitation of labor, the immorality of profit, the creation and the institution of wage labor, and the separation of the masses from the means of production. That's a mouthful. Spend a little time here. The alienation of labor. 300 years ago, everything that was made was handmade. So I'm a cobbler, and I'm a master cobbler. I employ 3 journeymen and 2 apprentices in my shop. I make about 9 pairs of boots a week. My boots are very fine, and cavalrymen in the Army like to buy them. I take pride in watching them walk around. I take pride in my work. I'm a member of a guild. I have a say in the community. I'm respected. If we are what we do, then my work defines my life and gives my life meaning. Well, a guy across town opens up a factory, hires unskilled people. He makes boots too. I can make 9 pairs of boots a week. He can make 100 pairs of boots a day. His boots are nowhere near as nice as mine, but they're good enough. And he gets a government contract, and I go out of business. So I go get a job working for him. He puts me on a conveyor. A sole comes by. I grab a heel, put it in, pull a lever. Sole comes by, grab it, and I do this 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. At the end, he pays me a little money, and I leave. I never see the finished boot. I've become alienated from my labor. My labor does not define me. My meaning of life has in some ways disappeared if work defines my life. Exploitation of labor, if I ask for more money, he'll fire me. If I get sick or hurt in his dangerous factory, he'll fire me. If the economic cycle goes down, he'll fire me. I have no control over my life in terms of how I work. All I have to give is my labor for wages. Marx sees this as absolutely immoral. Profit, he says, is immoral. Well, the man who owns the factory has 2 expenses, raw materials and labor. Nothing he can do about raw materials. They are what they are. Labor, he can add on more or lay off more, depending on the cycle. If based on materials and labor, he figures it costs him $9 to make a pair of boots. He sells it for $20. Nobody buys it. $18. He sells 2 pair. $15. He sells them all. That's the price point. It's not by him. The market decides what that is. So he makes a profit of $6 on every pair of boots. He may put $1 back into the company, give $1 to his shareholders. He keeps the rest for himself. Marx sees this as absolutely immoral. The profit is essentially the unpaid wages of labor. So if I sell a boot for more than it costs me to make it, that money should be distributed back into the labor force that made the boot. That is, yeah.
Did Marx comment at all on the fact that this capitalist took a huge risk?
Oh, absolutely.
By borrowing money?
Yeah, and that's one of that's part of the prominent. It was the capitalist that takes the risk and puts the money up. Yeah, no, he knows that. It doesn't make much of a difference to what he comes up with in his basic theory. So the institution of wage labor we just discussed, separation of the masses from the means of production. Much has changed since this book was published in 1869. And the means of production is one of them. Steam engine was a means of production. If I leave this company, I leave Harry and I go work for Dave, I can't take the steam engine with me. But today, if I'm a programmer or an applications developer, which I was, when I leave this company and I go to work for the state, my means of production is my knowledge base. The means of production comes with me. So this part he never foresaw. So the shifting economic landscape and the shifting landscape of the information age has slightly changed this some. Evolution of socialism from an unworkable utopian ideal. We'll discuss how it's unworkable in a little bit. It evolves into workable modern social economies. The picture on the right is Katrin Jakobsdottir. At the time when I did made this presentation, she was the Prime Minister of Iceland, and I had just visited Iceland and seen how their democratic socialism works, which is extremely well. But there's only 600,000 of them. They have an unlimited free energy supply. They have a lot of things going for it that makes that possible. Economic variations, we have the, all the way on the left is basically communism, socialism. And then we have social democracy, democratic socialism. These are very nuanced. They're basically the same thing. And at the end is social capitalism, which is what I am. Economic variations are based on the extent of the ownership of the means of production, social welfare expenditure, and market, non-market, mixed market economic models. Modern socialism since 1945, the emphasis is on the welfare of the collective, cooperation over competition. It's the opposite of capitalism. Contemporary forms, we just discussed. The goal is to use the elements of socialist economics to mitigate the harsher aspects of capitalism upon the society, while maintaining the benefits of market-driven economy towards the goal of providing the opportunity to live a fulfilling life to the greatest number of people. A fulfilling life to the greatest number of people. The reality is, well, on a fulfilling life, so you may not be rich, okay? But you might be happy, and you might be healthy, and you might be secure. So the reality is it's very successful among industrialized multi-source economies with small, educated, culturally homogeneous populations, chiefly in Northern Europe with the Nordic model, which we'll discuss. Good success in larger countries like France and Germany. Nations like Canada, Australia, and the United States have a mixed record. Facts about modern socialist systems. They employ various tax structures and strategies to promote the welfare of the collective while maintaining individual freedom. Some may employ some degree of state or municipal ownership of the means of production as regards some critical industries such as utilities, while others are entirely privately owned. If you look around, you will find that you are now sitting in a municipally owned utility. Socialism has found you. There is no single rigid definition other than they are all considered leftist, being closer to or farther away the Marxist ideal. Many times when I hear the word socialism, it's linked with communism. To obtain a clearer understanding, take a quick look at Karl Marx's idea. Marx envisioned communism to be created in 4 stages. The first is late capitalism. So the income disparity is so great that you have basically people with controlling all of the wealth and people with no money to buy anything. So capitalism has stopped. There's a workers' revolution, a proletarian revolution. Well, you see the word proletarian, you may not be familiar with it. It comes from the Latin proles, which means children. It goes back to the Roman Empire, where you had the city of Rome surrounded by 3 miles of slums and tenements, and people who were dependent on the state for grain. The only asset to the state that they could provide was their children, mainly to serve in the army. After this revolution, this proletarian revolution, we have the proletarian dictatorship. This is the fun part, where we all get to sit around after we overthrow the government and figure out how we're going to keep the trains running, who's going to do what, who's going to answer to who's going to be responsible without establishing a class system. And in Lenin's case, in Russia, how do we get the food from the country into the cities? This was a problem that he really never solved. But say that they get this working right. The next stage is socialism. We nationalize everything. The banks, the railroads, all the infrastructure belongs to the state. Private property goes away. Finally, communism. This is a global application of this model. Of course, they never got this far. In fact, in all implementations of communism, they never got past the second stage. A little bit of socialism, some nationalization of the infrastructures. In Russia's case, yeah, private property, but not to the extent that Marx has defined in his somewhat large book. The whole world was supposed to look at how fantastic this system is and just start overthrowing governments and all going and this was his global view of communism. The 10 planks of communism as a political system, as defined in the manifesto, are, abolition of property and land and application. This is the abolition of private property. That's number one for Marx. A heavy progressive graduated tax, abolition of inheritance, confiscation of property of immigrants and rebels, centralization of credit and national banks. Centralization of these three here are the nationalization of everything. Equal liability of all to work. Combination of agriculture. Basically, they're taking the populations in the cities and moving them into the countryside. Russia didn't do this. China did, at the expense of about 1 million lives in the Cultural Revolution. I actually worked with some people who went through that. Free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor. Well, that's in our Constitution. This is what modern socialism keeps. This is the main difference between the two models. What it discards is unworkable and undesirable. Well, abolition of private, that's out. What we keep is a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. We'll come back to inheritance, equal liability of all to work, free education for children in public schools. Great. Inheritance is an interesting issue because in order for capitalism to work, the people at the top need to recycle through so that the people at the bottom can come up by their own efforts, okay? What happens is the people at the top, the billionaire class, they pull the ladder up behind them. So you're bouncing off the ceiling. You can't, as hard as you work, the capitalist system is not working for you because the guys at the top, with all the political influence, have stopped allowing anyone else to come up. Well, inheritance solves that. Most of the billionaires, about 70% of them, at least in this country, came from a working class. They weren't privileged. What they have in common is that they were superbly educated, and they had an ability to understand risk and recognize a profitable situation where they could apply themselves and become wealthy. But to pass that wealth on to their son, statistics show that after 3 generations, inherited wealth fizzles out anyway. It's all gone. What you cannot pass is that ability to take the risk, to recognize situations that allowed you to, and your education that allowed you to achieve the heights that you achieved. Thomas Jefferson didn't want any inheritance. When you died, everything went to the state. But he was overridden by Hamilton and Madison. Most of the Euro-socialisms have some kind of inheritance laws. If you die with $200 million and you have a wife and 3 kids, give them all $20 million. The rest goes to the state. If they can't make it on $20 million, maybe there's something weird, okay? So that's one way of looking at it. Others do it differently. But this is one way to keep capitalism going while still providing a fulfilling life for the greatest number of people. Basically, the intent of Marx's system is to create social equality with the institution of economic policies that benefit a collective welfare, managed by a system composed of a commune of workers. In other words, a communism. So who might think this is a good idea? Well, if you live in a country where you have a 50-50 shot of waking up dead tomorrow, where the secret police can bash your door down at 2 a.m., where there's no work, no food, no education, is run by a kleptocracy of thieves and drug lords, this sounds like a pretty damn good idea, because at least I'm going to have something to do, and they're going to feed me and give me somewhere to live. It's not a bad place to start. So what's been the result when put into actual practice? These are the 5 remaining communisms in the world. Marxist-Leninist, Trotskyism, Maoism. Communism is a workers' revolution founded on the back of the proletariat. Maoism is a workers' revolution founded on the back of the peasantry. They didn't have a proletariat because they weren't industrialized after World War II. Well, Marx's goal of communism is to create global, stateless, egalitarian, classless society. Stateless, no borders. Okay? Go to where the work is. You don't need armies. Who are you going to fight? Other workers? This is his lofty vision. The reality is that it's an idealistic system viable at the theoretical level only. It makes great conversation at the bar or the dorm room. In actual application, it's something else. A true Trotskyite form of orthodox communism has never been established. Of the 5 communist countries remaining in the world, 2 are bureaucratic dictatorships, that would be Cuba and North Korea, and 3 are Maoist totalitarianisms with planned non-market economies. In fairness, because you'll ask, why are all the people in China so rich? And they are. They have billionaires. They're a communist country. They, like Russia, have instituted a form of capitalism called state capitalism. It is rigidly policed, and it is, it's rigidly policed, and it's very close to authoritarianism. In Russia's case, Putin just took all of the natural resources and infrastructure that they had nationalized in communism and privatized them to his friends, sold them vouchers to buy these things, and they became Russian oligarchs, billionaires. The richest one was a man named Khodorkovsky. He's presently enjoying Siberian labor camp right now. He lost everything because he got on the wrong side of Putin. In China, from 2003 to 2013, they executed 13 billionaires because they become rich, they travel, they get an attitude, and they lose the political vision, and they're killed. So it's not all, state capitalism is not quite like the capitalism that you would want. Since its first practical application in 1917, communism has only proven its ability to make everyone equally poor. Karl Marx believed that laissez-faire capitalism, in achieving late stage, consumes itself through mechanisms like growing income inequality, where the concentration of wealth in fewer hands reduces consumer spending power, and by exploiting natural resources to the point of depletion, creating unsustainable conditions for future economic activity. You could argue that that description fits, in many ways, what we're currently going through. Essentially, capitalism's inherent drive for profit can lead to its own destruction if not managed with social and environmental considerations, i.e., regulation. Income disparity is one of the greatest weaknesses of capitalism, but what does that really mean? I had kind of fun doing this one. See that little black tip of that pyramid way, way, way up there? That's the top 1/10%. Not 1%, 1/10 of 1%. People making over $3.3 million a year, there's about 133,000 of them. It includes the billionaire superclass. In this country, 756 people. Globally, about 2,700 people, and including some women.
Jim,
Yes, sir.
I think you just confused wealth with income. Is that supposed to be greater than $3 million of income or $3 million of wealth?
$3 million of income.
Income?
Yes.
But over here, you're showing wealth.
That is the triangle itself, the entire available pool of wealth within the nation.
Okay, but you're pointing to that top triangle, and those are the wealthiest. A wealthy person might have zero income, or they might have, they don't necessarily have to have a lot of income to have a lot of wealth, do they?
Yeah, okay, well, it's my fault. It's wealth. It's
It is wealth.
Yeah.
Okay.
The ones that do work, according to the stats that I read, make over this amount. Okay. The top 1%, the ones that do work, make over 800,000. There's about 1.8 million of them, and making over 167,000 per working household is about 13 million. These altogether comprise the top 10%. The green part is essentially the middle class, the upper working class, greater than 70,000. There's 50 million of them. 66 million in the bottom, 50%. So what does this really mean? It divides up, I mean, the wealth that people are making on an annual basis, but it doesn't say who controls the wealth. That's an entirely different calculation. The top 1/10% controls 13% of the wealth. The top 1%, which includes them, controls 30%, up from 22% in 1989. And the top 10% controls 60% of the wealth. The middle class controls 37% of the wealth. The underclass controls 2%, down from 3.5% in 1979. And in dollars, that's 5.7 trillion down to 3.9 trillion. As we talk further, keep your eye on the green part, because when we talk about the redistribution of the wealth, the one thing that the top 10% can never afford to happen is that the people in the green part who envision themselves being able to ascend to the top part, if they come to the conclusion that they are at a risk of falling into the bottom part, bad things happen. In 1960, the top 10% controlled 33% of the wealth. In 1980, their share nearly doubled. So the question is, what happened in 1980? And we'll see. This is a famous political cartoon during the first Gilded Age, turn of the 19th century. These are the fat cat robber barons, okay, as they're portrayed. The reality is that most of these men, John Jacob Astor, Vanderbilt, these men worked incredibly hard. 12, 14 hours a day, took incredible risks. And what this cartoon is transmitting is that great wealth translates to great access to power. So they are overlooking the government, which is those little guys at the bottom in the chairs. In 1870 and 1920, America's Gilded Age, post-Civil War, we're an emerging market. You want to invest in an emerging market because they grow, and your investments will grow at the same time. The corporate tax rate is 1%. 1%, because the government of the United States at this time is simply not interested in regulating the economy, the banks, or finance. To Teddy Roosevelt's credit, he invokes the Sherman Antitrust Act to try to break up monopolies. And after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, he passed some laws guaranteeing some safety considerations for the workers. But because the banks and finances were not regulated, it resulted in speculation and brought on the Great Depression. Capitalism, unless supplemented by a social policy of redistribution, does inherently produce social inequality and income disparity. When the distribution of wealth becomes prohibitively disproportionate, a redistribution of that wealth will occur. History has shown this. This redistribution can take different forms. France in 1789 was the first modern incidence of redistribution of wealth. Hereditary aristocracies redistributed to the masses. The gentleman in the portrait is Louis-Antoine Saint-Just, whose job was to export the revolution from the cities to the countryside at the cost of thousands of lives. Russia in 1917, the man in the picture is Vladimir Lenin. His installation of communism and overthrow of a decadent aristocracy that had outlived its usefulness years ago, it sent shockwaves through the Western capitalist economies. It really disturbed them. He died in 1924, still trying to get the communist model going. To his dying day, he believed that Germany, seeing what Russia had done, given the chaos after World War I, they would declare communism and overthrow the government. It never happened. After he died, Leon Trotsky and Stalin had a disagreement. Trotsky lost. He was exiled, later murdered in Mexico City in 1940 by Stalinist agents, and Joseph Stalin installed, instead of a Marxist communism, a authoritarian dictatorship, basically a police state, with some aspects of communism, mainly being no private property. And he kept this up as what we know as the Soviet Union. But the redistribution of wealth does not have to be violent. In 1932 to 44, social policies under Franklin Roosevelt gave us Social Security, labor policies supporting strong unions, high minimum wage, bank and finance regulation. What happened was the owning class, concerned about the rise of communist ideology in Europe, supports, Ray agrees not to actively resist, government programs and policies that benefit the collective welfare. Their saying was better to make concessions to the working class than be thrown out by them. So they got rattled. Second Bill of Rights, FDR. Every American has a right to a job, adequate wage, decent living, decent home, medical care, economic protection during sickness, accident, old age, or unemployment, and a good education. The Democratic Socialist of America Party embraces all of these ideas. But FDR wasn't a socialist. He was an aristocrat from New York, a wealthy aristocrat. But given the misery around him, he genuinely felt that something had to be done, and he did it through these social welfare policies, which after the war brought on the fabulous 50s, extending all the way up to 1980, a period of enormous economic expansion. Corporate tax rate goes to 50%, marginal rate to 74. Top 10 control 33% of the wealth, down from 49. 33% is about where it should be for a healthy capitalism. 1950 to 1980 is called the Great Compression. Wealth increases for the middle class, strong unions, high minimum wage, middle class at 61% of the population. Middle class today is just below 50% of the population. This prosperity was not equally distributed, but civil rights movements of the 60s and the feminist movement of the 70s began to address this inequitable distribution. The working class enjoys discretionary income, mainly for the first time, and fuels the national economy to first place in the world. And these are just pictures of the kind of craziness that went on then. 1980, the American people, worn out by 15 years of poor leadership, war, and inflation, elect Ronald Reagan to the presidency. Ronald Reagan is a rabid anti-communist, and he believes that he can defeat communism, defeat the Soviet Union economically. And he was right, at a cost. Economic neoliberalism was the phrase. You remember trickle-down economy. A rising tide floats all boats. Okay, well, some boats float higher and faster than other boats. It's a return to laissez-faire, bank and finance deregulation on day one, union busting and policies designed to weaken the labor force from forming unions. By 1985, just 5 years later, corporate tax rates back down to 20% from 50. Top 10% now control 42, up from 33%. 24, last year, corporate tax rates about the same. The top 10% control 60 to 70% of the wealth. So everything that we gained from going from one Gilded Age through the Depression, through the 50s and 60s, we're back to where we were, and they're calling this now the second Gilded Age. But the emerging market isn't us. The emerging markets are overseas. That's where the billionaires are putting their money, and that's where the workforce went. That's where the jobs went, because labor's cheaper there. These are all probably unforeseen circumstances, unintended circumstances, that what Reagan's main concentration was the defeat of the Soviet Union. These policies continued by succeeding presidents of both parties, directly led to the meltdown of 2008 and the TARP bailout of banks too big to fail, costing millions of jobs and trillions of dollars. These policies are still in effect today. Modern democratic socialist economics and regulations can mitigate the harsher aspects of capitalism, but it isn't for everybody. First, you have to have complete political and social commitment, a unified social consciousness. Second, you must have the proper conditions. Diverse economy, manageable levels of corruption. Even given the present administration, you could say that the United States does have these. We can get the proper planning, constant economic review and regulation, rigorous program enforcement, strict immigration policy. We don't have any of those. Specter of Venezuela. A lot of things you hear when someone advances an idea politically of some kind of social welfare program that they think might be helpful. Oh, we'll turn into Venezuela. Well, what happened in Venezuela? This is the ad. It's targeted to millennials. Why is that? About to witness another socialist government fail is probably going to ask for some help from capitalist nations. And then some snarky thing at the bottom. Okay, the claim is Venezuela adopted socialism and so it failed as a state. Socialism was the reason for this failure. The facts. Venezuela's economy is entirely based on oil. It is a mono-economy. In 1998, when Chavez took power, oil prices were high. You may remember paying over $4 a gallon. People in California are paying over $7 a gallon. Chavez attempted to maintain power by instituting social programs because all this money was flowing in. Within 10 years, illiteracy and poverty were cut by a fifth. Free medical clinics, food and housing subsidies improved the overall quality of life for Venezuela. This was a success. These benefits, though, were not distributed equitably due to the fact that they're the 13th most corrupt nation in the world. In 2010, the oil prices fell. They didn't fall, they crashed. You can remember paying less than $1 with no Kroger points. And there was actually a short period of time when oil was trading at $0 per barrel, which means you couldn't give it away. Mismanagement, overextension, and corruption caused a state of emergency and an economic recession, allowing Maduro to seize power as the de facto dictator of a failed kleptocracy. Knowing this now, go back to the original claim. Venezuela adopted socialism and so it failed as a state. Socialism is the reason? No. Socialism should never have been attempted in a mono economy. There's no possible way it could sustain itself. You just can't throw money at a social problem. Social welfare requires constant vigilance and commitment if it's to be successful and sustainable. The Dutch school example. I've been to Holland a couple of times, Netherlands a couple of times. So I'm a Dutchman and I'm working and I have a daughter and she reaches school age. Well, suddenly I'm getting an extra 100, 150 euros deposited in my account by the state. I didn't do anything. They know I have a daughter. They know she's school age. They just start giving me money. Why? Because I pay a lot of taxes. And my daughter needs transportation to school, clothes, and her own school supplies. This is a burden on me. The state knows this. so they compensate me for this. There's nothing keeping me from taking that money and going to the casino and putting it all on red. But if my daughter shows up at school late, ragged, and no school supplies, there's a knock on my door. Not a year later, not 2 years later, within the month. They want to know what I did with the money. Now I'm in the system, and I don't want to be in the system. That's why you have to maintain vigilance on this. People trying to game the system, people not cooperating. Finnish schools. In Finland, schools for profit at any level are illegal. I'm a Finnish millionaire, and there's lots of Finnish millionaires. I have a son. Well, I could send him to school in England, America, but I want to raise my son. I want to keep him here. So he has to go to Finnish public school like all other Finnish sons. So it's in my best interest to make sure that that school is the best damn school that can be. And they are. When a school in northern Finland gets new soccer nets and iTablets, they all get new soccer nets and iTablets. They're identical, and they are identically great schools. COVID relief, Great Society, Appalachian Regional Commission. COVID relief, over $100 billion went to fraud, and they're still prosecuting these people. People trying to game the system. This is a process where the intent was well-meaning, and people needed that money, but people trying to game the system. Great Society under Johnson to relieve poverty in Appalachia. Well, Mississippi is part of that project. They get to dip into that pot of money. I have family in Mississippi. There are no mountains in Mississippi. They have their own poverty problems, for sure, but they're not Appalachian. They found a geologist who went down into the mantle of the earth and found an underlying substrata of rock that contributed to the pre-Pleistocene uplift that we know as the Appalachian Mountains that extended that far into Mississippi, and they get a piece of that money. Appalachian Regional Commission, part of those funds actually went to the construction of the practice facility for the Carolina Panthers. You can't run social welfare programs like this. It won't work. If you cannot control this, you should not even start. Argument, socialism has never worked. It's failed in every country that has tried it. That's true for orthodox Marxist socialism, but it's false for modern socialism as given by the Nordic model. Nordic model of social democracy includes a comprehensive welfare state, multi-level collective bargaining with a high percentage of unionized workforce, while being based on economic foundations of free market capitalism. And Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland are the models here. I've been to Iceland. I haven't been to the others. Modern socialism does have inherent weaknesses. The criminal element. Any political system depends on its society to act rationally. The criminal element does not act rationally. They're antisocial. So they become a problem. People trying to game the system are parts of the criminal. If you're trying to get around the rules, you're essentially an enemy of the people because other people are trying to work within the system. Unregulated immigration. The latest election in Germany, this was the hot button item. This was what people were mainly voting for. And it's not that they don't like that ethnic group or that racial group or that religious group. It's people coming into Germany that don't speak German and can't get a job. Therefore, they can't pay taxes to contribute to the system that made Germany the reason they wanted to go there in the first place. And what's the answer to this? I mean, we have an immigration problem too. For the larger the country, the wider the borders, the harder it is. Unpredictable and extended economic downturns, pandemics, war, a series of natural disasters are all things you can't predict that are going to tax the amount of money you have going toward these social welfare programs. So basically, What I'm trying to say is it ain't easy. You need the right conditions, and you need a lot of things going for you. Overview of non-traditional economic systems. Mr. Coffey, this is your slide that I said that you might like. Up at the top in capitalism is the market economies, laissez-faire, market-driven, no external control, diverse, efficient, profitable, unequal distribution of wealth resulting in income disparity, poverty, plutocracy, and oligarchy at the extreme. Plutocracy is government by the rich. Oligarchy is government by the few, and it is possible to have a plutocratic oligarchy. At the bottom, planned economies. These include the state economies like China and Russia are now, to command economies where it's complete regulation of production, distribution, and prices, state ownership of industry. This would be like Myanmar. Low levels of income inequality and unemployment. That's good. Inefficient, lack of product diversity, competition, innovation, and quality. It's a dead end. Where you want to be is here in the middle. Mixed market economies, democratic socialism, social democracy, social capitalism, mix of free markets and planned economic controls. Degrees of regulation with the intent of mitigating poverty and increasing the welfare of the collective through social programs. Mitigating poverty is job one. Difficult to implement as success is dependent on many factors that we just discussed. So today's political discourse, wherein terms such as welfare state, social welfare programs, and socialism as an ideology are used, no one's talking about communism. Nobody's talking about state ownership of the means of production or the abolition of private property, and nobody's calling anybody comrade. Now, I see you. All right. Now, I left this line in, okay, because I made this presentation before I joined the DSA. When I joined the DSA, it's 2 years ago, I got a welcoming email that started out, "Welcome, comrade." Okay, the leadership has changed since then. I have not seen the word since in any of the literature that I've received. I don't think that calling people comrade is moving our cause forward any. And I wish that would stop, but they're not asking me. I don't make the rules. But I left it in because I thought, well, yeah, keeps me humble. Yet the confusion persists. Here we have the angry young man claiming the liberal Democrats and their socialist agenda are trying to change the USA into a welfare state. Words that we're afraid of, okay? Well, what are they? What do they really mean? The term liberal is ambiguous. You just can't say liberal and have it mean anything. Philosopher John Locke, 17th century, is credited with founding political liberalism as a distinct tradition based on social contract, arguing that each man has a natural right to life, liberty, and property, and equality before the law. And governments must not violate these rights. So when you hear the term liberal democracy, they're talking about a government of and by the people that embraces Locke's contract. All of our founding fathers read Locke. It is all through the literature. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in the book, it's called The Second Treatise on Government. So conservative or progressive, I mean, who doesn't agree with this, right? It's a pretty basic social contract. Cultural liberals, a different kind of liberals, see themselves as defending the moral rights of nonconformists to express their own identity however they see fit, as long as they don't harm anyone. So you could think here maybe the LGBTQ community. Libertarians, they're on the far right. They agree with this. Their number one plank in their platform is that any action that I take in my own self-interest is moral by definition. And in objectivism, which is the extreme form of libertarianism, is Ayn Rand's objectivism, is that it is immoral for me not to act in my own self-interest. Social liberalism, also known as modern liberalism, is a political ideology that endorses regulated free market economy and expansion of civil and political rights. increase government spending for social welfare systems. This is the liberalism that the angry young man is talking about. Okay? But he's not specifying that, and he probably doesn't even know the difference. Perhaps progressivism might be a better word. And rather than calling me a liberal or a Democrat, call me a progressive. It's much more definitive. So he mentioned welfare and the welfare state. It's often associated with takers, social parasites who refuse to work, preferring only to rely on the largesse of the state. So what's the true meaning? In 1945, the sociologist T.H. Marshall identified modern welfare states as distinctive combination of democracy, welfare, and capitalism. That citizenship must encompass access to social rights as well as political and civil rights. So since that time, the welfare state applies only to states where social rights are accompanied by civil and political rights. So that would have omitted the Soviet Union and Maoist China. These are the welfare states. This is badly out of date. If we were to update it, Iceland would certainly be yellow, if not green, and Ireland, Republic of, would probably be orange, if not yellow. But there's not many welfare states. Welfare in terms of prosperity and progress, or the collective, is not a new concept. It's in the preamble. Promote the general welfare. Socialism or capitalism, or being, for you English teachers, the disjunctive, it implies we can have one or the other, that they're mutually exclusive, and this is a myth. I stand before you. Social capitalists understand the economy to consist of two tiers. The top tier, tier one, consists of assets to the state in terms of productivity, the governing class, the owning class, the actively employed working class, skilled professionals, the military, and taxpayers in general. Tier two, liabilities to the state, the underclass, the poverty-stricken, the lumpenproletariat, social parasites, and the criminal element. Lumpenproletariat. Lumpenproletariat is Marxist term for people who are absolutely dependent on the largesse of the state for their mere survival. So think about the homeless people on Skid Row in LA. They'll die if someone doesn't keep them alive. Okay, those are the lumpenproletariat. Okay, so the goal in social capitalism is to move as many of the people on tier two up to tier one. The social parasites, the criminal element, you're never going to get rid of them, but you try to minimize them to 3% or less is the goal. Okay? A purist is going to say, well, what about children and retired old people? They're liabilities to the state. Retired old people spent their whole life inputting into the state. They've deserved their rest. Children are liabilities to the state, but they are potential assets, and they also comprise the future of the state. So the state is responsible for defense, infrastructure, regulation, social welfare programs, education and tuition, health care and child care, parental leave, elderly and disabled, and that's it. So what do we mean by, well, that's it? Well, Denmark doesn't have a space program. Okay. Sweden doesn't have 300 overseas military bases. Iceland doesn't have 13 carrier battle groups. I'm not saying that any of these are bad or we shouldn't have them. The issue is, can you afford them while still providing the most fulfilling life for the greatest number of people? Personally, I think the space program is very valuable, if for nothing else than the collateral engineering technologies that come out of trying to do something difficult. But you can see by this that if you're going to, like Germany, have these types of social welfare programs, it's going to be a fine line you walk in terms of being able to afford it. So, well, we can't afford all that. This brings us to taxes. Well, how much you are taxed is absolutely irrelevant. What is relevant is what you get for those taxes, okay? So we got the red button and the green button, free tuition and universal health care. United States is right in the middle, taxed at 23.8%. We have no buttons. If you go 2 up to Sweden, ask me to pay a mere 1.8% more, or 1.5% more, I get both buttons. If I go up to Germany, well, they're taxed at 40%. That's a lot. But their mass transportation system is second to none. You don't even need to own a car. There's trains all over the place. Now, the geography is different. The distances between the major population centers aren't as vast as ours is. But this is what Germans wanted. And I have a friend in Germany, came to us as a teenager. She's now a professor at a university studying biofuels. She just had a child. The state made her quit work a month before, not because she could, but because it's the law. She has not been able to go back to work until about 3 more weeks from now. She had a child in January or in December, I think. Her husband gets some parental leave, but she gets all parental leave. She draws full salary because it's subsidized by the state and by her employer, which is the university, the city where she works. It's just the way they do it. All these Euro-socialisms do it slightly differently. The main thing is that it can be done, and you don't have to pay a lot more taxes than you're already paying now. It's where those taxes are going. Socialism in America, the precedents are already established. Universal health care, military, federal employees, including Congress, that's voting about your health care. Citizens over 65, somewhat, Medicare will not cover everything, and it does run out. It amounts to 17% of the population. At least it's a start. Social Security created by FDR, system of old age benefits for workers, benefits for victims of accidents, aid for dependent mothers and children, the blind, the physically handicapped, and the intellectually disabled. That's a pretty good policy. Free college education, the GI Bill of 1944, arguably the finest piece of legislation ever passed in this country. A 4-year tuition based on written test scores, so you have to qualify. All of the Euro-socialisms that offer free education up to the doctorate level, you have to keep taking a series of tests all the way up. And if you fall out at some point, trade schools are free as well. So Johnny grows up on a farm in North Georgia, and in 1943, he joins the army, and they send him to Germany or to France to fight Adolf Hitler and the fascists. This exposes him to a whole new worldview, a broader reality. He comes back, decides he doesn't want to go back to the farm, passes the test, gets a 4-year engineering degree at Georgia Tech, and in 15 years helps to put a man on the moon. What you invest in college education for the population, you get back 100 times. You know, it doesn't make much sense to me why people going to college now owe over $16 trillion in student loans. It seems to be criminal to me. Understanding the new socialists. AOC and Tlaib were elected in 2018. They're registered members of the DSA, which was originally founded in 1982, where it changed its name over from the Socialists of America that Eugene Debs had found. Now with over 70,000 members. We had 80,000, and since Trump's reelection, they say that we're growing even more. The DSA represents a social progressive movement, not a Marxist movement, supporting universal health care, free university trade school tuition, strong unions, child care and parental leave, equal rights and equality before the law. It's not an elected body. We don't run candidates, but we do endorse candidates. We had a socialist candidate just get elected to the city commission in Louisville. When I joined the DSA and I read this, those healthcare, free university children, all those types of programs. I support every one of them. And I've seen them in other countries, and I'm left wondering why we can't have things like that too. Median age of DSA members in 2013 was 68, but after the election of Trump, membership increased over 100%. Median age is now 33. Millennials make up this new demographic. Remember, the specter of Venezuela was targeted toward millennials. This strikes fear into a lot of, especially conservative politicians. They don't remember a world with a Soviet Union. They were never exposed to Cold War propaganda. They never had to hide under their desks on Friday at noon when the air raid siren went off, like I did. And they do not fear the word socialist. Every revolutionary party finds in its chief support in the younger generation of the rising class. Political decay expresses itself in a loss of ability to attract youth under one's banner. Leon Trotsky, think about that in terms of the last election. Who did the youth vote for? The pushback is strong and vocal. A couple of communists, quote unquote, Senator Lindsey Graham. Well, Senator Graham is a lot of things. He's not stupid, and he knows that that's not true, but he also knows that hyperbole will get him on the news, and that's pretty much what the focus of politicians these days. So, complex issues cannot be presented in 10-second sound bites. Claims and statements must be evaluated in terms of their truth value, over and above the bias or emotional appeal. If we wish to be well informed, we must put in the work. I'll leave you with this. To withhold care when care is available from those that require it based on an ability to pay is immoral. What wide-eyed leftist came up with that? He was overruled by Hamilton and Madison again. When it's all said and done, there's one fact that all economic systems can agree on, that poverty makes us all poor. Thanks. Okay, I think we can open it for questions. What time is it?
6:20.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You covered so much, my head is exploding. How are
It
you
was my
registered?
secret aim.
How are you registered to vote?
And can you vote in primaries?
No, the state does not allow me to vote in primary elections. Now, when I lived in Virginia, they did. We don't have that. But no, even if I was registered as an independent, I'd still not be able to vote in primary. But as a member of the DSA, I still can. The two-party system is got a lock, a stranglehold on until we get some kind of a proportional voting system. Third-party candidates, third-party options are never going to be able to penetrate the two parties. So the only hope that the DSA has is to get into the Democratic Party and co-opt it from the inside, turn it more towards what we've been discussing here, and hope that people will vote for it. That's the only way to do it, is work within the system. I mean, a physical revolution is not in the cards either. No one's talking about that. Yes, ma'am?
You make passing reference to the social contract. I wonder if you would expand on that and tell me if you think that that concept is liberal.
Is liberal? Is broken. Oh. Well, the social contract is what Locke said it was, as I described. It's rights to property, educate. Yeah. Well, it's life, liberty, and property, and in the Declaration, it's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, because Jefferson couldn't put property because slaves were property, and if he did, the people in the North wouldn't have signed the damn thing. So, but it's all Locke, okay? Now, has that been compromised? There's a lot of social contracts. Rousseau had one. Rousseau said that the source of all human misery can be traced back to the first man who fenced off a piece of land, stood in the middle of it and said, "This is mine," and they let him get away with it, okay? Which, if you extrapolate that, that's why Marx says no private property. That's the abolition of all private property is so essential in communism, is because of that. But I would say that the social contract now is been interpreted perhaps in a different way than Locke meant it, than the founders meant it, to be able to fit the type of programs that we see going on every day now in the news. Does that answer your question? No? Do you have a better answer? Go ahead, let me know. Okay. The lady next to you, and then you.
Okay, so, you said that you have to be educated. And I keep asking, it's like, okay, people don't watch the news, they don't read the newspaper, and they are being educated by sound bites on Facebook and TikTok. What do you do? How do you reach people? What do you do?
Well, the first thing I would do would be quit listening to people like me that are 70 years old and start trying to incorporate youth into the movement. People they don't even buy televisions anymore. They don't get their news from television. So that's the communications environment that you have to operate in order to reach these people. They're educated. They're just not educated in that way. Maybe they don't know how to determine the truth value of any given claim. They just take it face value and move on. I don't know. One of the nice things about being in the DSA is when we have meetings every month, I'm the oldest guy there. By far, probably by 30 years. It's a youth movement, and it's encouraging to see it happen. They are educated. They're sharp. So we'll see what comes of it. But yeah, it's frustrating. Sir.
There's a lot of good information on YouTube and TikTok. The problem is there's way more bad. And YouTube is radicalizing people farther and farther to the right. And you have to have a really good filter. And there's a meme of Facebook is radicalizing my dad or my granddad. That's not Fox News. That's fake.
Yeah.
So that's
Well said. Let me get her and then back to you. Yeah, go ahead, Lida.
Well, you talked about in these socialist countries, the things they had that.
Democratic socialist countries, yes.
Yeah.
Democratic socialist countries.
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand that our military expenditure is just really huge.
$789 billion this year.
Is that one of the reasons we don't have those nice things?
Yeah, that's a lot of it. The United States fits every definition of an empire. So if you go back through history, Roman Empire, French Empire, British Empire, they all end the same way. They go bankrupt. At the end of World War II, British colonialism, which had the sun never set. They had colonies all over. They couldn't wait to get rid of those colonies because they are so expensive. The British and the French share an aircraft carrier. Okay, we have 13 battle groups. Do we need them? It depends. It looks like we're gearing up for a fight with China. They have more carriers than we do. I mean, this is the mentality. I don't believe that having a military budget more than the next 20 countries' military budgets put together is sustainable. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex certainly plays a role there. They've gotten to where C-130 Hercules aircraft built in Georgia, but the parts are made in 41 of the 50 states. No congressman is going to vote to scrap the C-130, but the Air Force doesn't want any more. They don't need them anymore. They've been building it since the 50s. So things like that, it's in our system, it's much easier to create a new policy than it is to fix an old one. And that's where we are. But you're right. If we used some of that money, if we set the corporate tax rate up high, if we reduced the 10%, 60% control of the wealth back down to 33%, we could get the money there and still do the military thing. But like I said, wealth is access to power. You have access to power, then you get the laws that you want. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to hit on the soundbite thing of 10-second clips and not being able to see full, long, extended conversations between people. And I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump won the election, or at least became really popular, was the podcast scene.
Okay.
So he appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast. I personally think Joe Rogan's a pretty boring podcast, but to each their own. Nevertheless, I'll watch that because I wanted to see what I might be in for the next 4 years.
Good.
Both Kamala Harris and Trump did podcasts. Trump would do a podcast for 2, maybe 3 hours.
Yeah.
And frankly, the ones that I listened to from Kamala Harris, it was kind of weak, really, in my opinion.
Yes.
But I think young people are really looking for either way, it's hard to hide in 3 hours of this conversation between two people.
Yes.
And that's one thing I think the left could do way better is the podcast scene. If you look at the top podcasts, who's on it? Tucker Carlson.
Sure.
You might help me out here.
Dan
Candace
Bongino.
Candace Owens. I mean, they're running
Tim
it.
Pool.
Understood.
They're propped up by money.
Well, there's no question that when you say the left, I mean the manifestation of the left is the Democratic Party. Right now, there's certainly every reason to argue that they have no message. I mean, their message now is we're going to take them to court. Well, okay, take them to court, but that doesn't really resound with voters. You know, it's not like burn your bra or some of the things, you know, in Black Power. You know, those resound, but it's and the other is besides message is leadership. I mean, there's just Bernie Sanders to some extent, but he's older than I am, and I don't want to vote for anybody older than I am anymore. Okay, I need to see leadership like Buttigieg, somebody like that. Okay, well somebody like that. Okay, that is can speak and communicate an idea. And whether you personally like him or not, it's just, but we don't have any of that. So.
And I'm sorry, I just want to add one thing. I'm a libertarian. So,
Okay, good for you. Did we talk at the Pride
No, we
Parade?
did not.
Okay, I talked to your guys though.
I'm always talking to my dad about libertarian ideals and stuff,
Right.
and he says, "Well, you know, there's a rebuttal to that." And I'm like, "Where is it?" You know, because I'm trying to find it. I want to experience. That's one of the reasons I'm here.
Yeah.
Is because I want to find that alternate viewpoint and either reinforce my own,
Right.
opinions, or maybe adopt a new one.
Well, we have common ground. I had a great conversation with the guys, the libertarians that had their tent set up at the Gay Pride Festival. We talked for about 45 minutes. Very intelligent people. I met my first anarchist there. So we do have common ground. It's not a lot. Where a libertarian goes off the rails for me is the taxation issue. They see taxation as theft, basically. But acting in your own self-interest to a large degree, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with people getting rich. I have a problem with people not paying their fair share. So there's the two ideologies are, I mean, there's room to talk there. And even in your own party, you have libsocs, which are liberal, libertarian, socialist people. It's a big tent like ours is. Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, I know you. Okay.
Thank you for this. I just wanted to say that I appreciated I like all your different perspectives. I respect them, and I'm really glad this conversation was happening with Together Frankfort. I just kind of wanted to weigh in just from a perspective of a younger, registered a certain type of way, but seeing things from both sides. I really like the 10-second sound bites. You know, I personally, I love podcasts as well. I was really glad that he touched on that. I think both parties, one side has a very strong, they're coming very strong. And the other side, I feel like, is a little spineless right now. So I feel like I like the conversation of the age gap, the demographics, and I'd like to hit on the media now is 33 years of age, and I just think that it's very imperative. I'm not one to slander either side in a conversation like this, but I do see an influx of younger people. So I think it's really a conversation needs to be had in terms of strategy and actually coming together and being strategic, no matter really what party you're a part of or how you identify. So I just think just sitting back and listening to all perspectives has been very interesting. I think in particular here in Frankfort, I really hope that we can start being more strategic and having more conversations like this and trying to stay like-minded anyway. So I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. There's nothing wrong with talking. You know, I mean, get together and talk. Bill?
I do have a comment on
Ernie, I got you next.
On the right and the podcast and Joe Rogan's and all those kind of things, and the Trump thing. People are programmed to react and get excited about things that are not going well. You know, when you've got a lion's chasing you, you pretty much have to run, right? So the whole deal with the right has been with Ronald Reagan, not Ronald Reagan, it was with Ronald Reagan, it started with Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump, Joe Rogan, all those people, their job is to get you mad, to get you angry, to get you upset that something's wrong. We've been told that our country is terrible now for how long? Our country is not terrible. We don't live in a bad place, okay? But this is how they're growing their program. They're getting people mad, and then they're making up stuff, and and then they have their own agenda. We see the agenda that they have. Now, what does the left have? We haven't done anything wrong. We've built a good society for the most part, and then it comes to my next question I'm going to ask you about, Jeff. We built schools, colleges, education. We've done all the things as much as we could over the course of time, and we've done well. Our society's done well. We're the most successful country on the planet, by far, by every measure. Anything that you want to look at, we've done far better, except for the things that Jeff has illuminated in the countries that have democratic socialism, the schools, and the medical care, and those kind of things for the people. We haven't done that well. So, people don't recognize the good. They just don't. And so when we sit down and talk about these programs, it doesn't get people excited. And so when Pete Buttigieg gets up to talk about these things, even though he may do it in an intelligent manner, right? It still doesn't get people mad like they're getting chased at from a lion. It doesn't, the people who get mad like Joe Rogan is yelling at him in a podcast. Okay, so I don't know what the answer to that, but this is the problem that we have. This is why we're being called spineless. This is the reason why people say, well, where's our leaders? We have leaders. We don't have the best leaders right now. We need better leaders. We need younger leaders. But
you had a question for me?
I'm just not. Yeah, the question I have is where things have gone wrong. Is what do we do about the legal rule breakers?
Oh, I don't know.
What do we do about the legal rule breakers?
Enforce the law.
Yeah, I guess
There
you
are
enforce the law.
The laws have been changed to break the social contract in favor of the wealthy. Okay, those are legal lawbreakers.
Okay.
Some kind of a contradiction of terms.
I have a question for you. I've tried to figure out why our country is like it is, and we can't get to the place where we're sharing with one another as most of Europe does. Mm-hmm. And there are two things you haven't mentioned, and I just wondered what you think about this.
Okay.
One is race.
Okay.
which is sort of our original sin in America.
Mm.
And it's at the bottom of a lot of our divisions, a lot of our fears. And the other is individualism, where we don't want to be a collective.
Mm-hmm.
And I read Heather Cox Richardson all the time, who I think is wonderful. And she is always going back to how white capitalists have tried to divide white workers from black workers. You know, you don't want to share, you know, they're trying to get more of our stuff.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that's, what do you think the
Well,
role of race and individualism is in our difference with Europe?
Okay. The role of race in the countries that I've discussed, they are largely ethnically homogenous.
Yeah, and look at Germany, they're troubled now because of
Well, and I mentioned that the immigration is a huge problem, but it's not so much because they're black or Islamic, or it's because they don't speak the language, and they can't work, and they can't therefore be taxed and input into the system. There's probably some racism going on. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. In Germany, I didn't see any. In France, I didn't see any. In Holland, I mean, in Iceland, there really isn't any. They hire, most of their guest workers are hired from Poland. For some reason, they think they make great workers. They do. But you're talking about, like I said, in Iceland, when you're only 600,000 people and you can all trace your lineage back to the original 19 families, it gets easier. You know, and when you're 350 million population, ethnically diverse, and getting more and more diverse, the answers are harder. It's not so much that I don't have an answer for your question, that somebody doesn't have an answer for your question. It's that I don't see anyone working on those answers, and that's what frightens me. In terms of individualism, there's a lot to be said for rugged individualism. The capitalist system is mainly built on it. But just because we can bond together to have a healthcare system instead of a health insurance system doesn't really affect your individuality. Like I said with my libertarian friend, there's common ground here. There's things to do that can benefit all of us, regardless of the nuances of our particular ideologies. And all I can do is hope for the best in the future.
Barbara had a question.
Barbara?
Yeah, I heard Warren Buffett say that he paid, they were saying he paid millions of dollars in taxes.
Yeah.
Maybe more. And he said, you know, if the other billionaires would pay their fair share, nobody else would have to pay any taxes. Oh, they don't pay taxes. What can we do about that?
That's your legal lawyer.
Well, firing half of IRS is not going to help us.
That's their plan.
The billionaire class, I just finished reading a book on the plutocrats among us, and that's what it was. The billionaire class, like I said, in the United States, most of them came from working class backgrounds. The reason they don't pay taxes is because at that level, like Elon, he can get government contracts to subsidize the space work. Well, the government can't tax its own contract. So he really doesn't have an income, as Mr. Rosen said. On the books, he doesn't have an income. He doesn't create anything. He doesn't do anything. He invests in certain areas, but he doesn't manage those areas. He has people that do that. They get taxed. Now, there has been discussion over reforming the tax code since I was able to speak English, and it just keeps getting put off and put off for exactly that reason. The people in the top 10%, people in the top government, aspire to be in the super class. Okay, so they're not going to do anything to squirrel that, their chances to do that. It's a different world, and they're the eagles, and the people in the middle class and the bottom 50%, they're basically the sheep, and the sheep wonder about the eagles. Are they going to be good to us, or what can they do? How can we work with them? And the eagles, they don't even think in those terms. They could care less. The sheep are great. Let them do what they do. They work. Let's keep them around. But they're not going to extend themselves to do anything like make sure that we all get the health care that every human being deserves, or free education.
Like we need a revolution.
A revolution, okay.
I don't know what
Yes, David.
it's gonna work.
I never heard you mention the role of religion in this system.
Well, being an atheist, I probably wouldn't. But actually, in researching this, the Catholic Church is essentially a feudalism, and it has always been that way, and that's a pretty easy environment to operate in because it's a top-down oriented thing. But how would be more specific? How do you think religion would play into this?
Well, I don't know. It certainly seems to drive our politics, at least in this country.
Well, it is. What it gets to me is the religion thing in that context tends to go hand in hand with what I would call a provincial worldview. If you've spent all your life in southern Indiana and you never really been out of the state, me telling you how things are in the Netherlands is not going to fit. It's not going to work. To have in my life, I've traveled. Well, we've got 15 minutes. Okay. I had lived on both coasts of the United States, crossed the Atlantic by air, crossed the Pacific by sea, lived in Asia, Europe, all by the time I was 12. And in my last job, or second to last job, I traveled and did projects on 3 continents. So I don't have a provincial worldview. I have a international worldview. And I think that you have to have something approaching that in order to understand what we're talking about here and see how it can apply, rather than just listening to somebody on TV and voting for them because they said something that resonates with you in some way. Yes, Lida?
Jeff, the problem with their taxes is their legislature, they said that, and they're influenced by money, by the rich class.
Yes, they are.
And Citizens United has just about destroyed the influence of their Congress.
That was an unfortunate decision, but the Supreme Court often gets it wrong.
And they want to keep their seats above all.
Right.
And they need that money from those rich people to keep their seats.
Well, I mean,
So they don't work for us. And they're not going to give us a fair tax system.
Well,
When the rich people want the advantage with taxes.
Hamilton wanted age limits for Supreme Court justices. Madison shot him down. You would think that we could have an Article 5 Constitutional Convention or even pass by amendment something to fix that, but it's not going to happen because you're speaking to power, and they would have to approve their own limitations, and it's not going to happen. So, David?
So, in this discussion, you really didn't get into it much, but you did touch on the importance of unions.
Yeah.
And unions have been a major stronghold of socialist ideals.
Yes, unions are a socialist construct.
And we know that 1980s, under Reagan, it began to bust them down.
Yes.
And break them. So, do you see, and there's been a lot of polls lately showing the interest in unions more so in this country today than in a long time.
Yes.
But there are lots of impediments to unions in this country they put in place since then. What can we do? And what do you think the role of unions would be in a more socialist, democratic socialist system?
Unions are the only counter block to capitalism, exceedances in capitalism. Only through unionization are you able to have a say in how the owners of the means of production treat you and pay you and give you benefits, if any. I think that this is becoming more important now, but the truth is in the 30s when FDR passed legislation for support of unions, they succeeded by the 60s to shoot themselves in the foot by corruption and association with organized crime. So it was easy for Reagan to tear those down because they were already decadent. They were corrupt and decadent. But now they're rebuilding. The DSA places extreme emphasis on unionism. In fact, to the point where there's activities going on in eastern Kentucky now trying to unionize Amazon delivery people and Walmart people and things like that. But if you go into eastern Kentucky and you say that you represent the Democratic Socialists, so that's about as far as you get. You know, and then they're beating you. Mr. Rosen, thank you for sparing me tonight.
I'm just standing up, I'm not leaving.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thanks for coming out. My libertarian friends, thank you very much for showing up. If one of your guys does this, I'll return the favor.
All right.
Okay.